Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the PYRESWAP show. Today is Macro Mondays, and we're very, very excited to talk to you guys about a whole bunch of things going on in the global economy, and we also want to talk a little bit about stuff going on in the PYRESWAP economy. Now, is someone reporting an audio problem? Do we have an audio problem here? Do we have an audio problem still? How's the audio now? Oh, fantastic. Okay, the audio problem was on somebody else's end. But yeah, always good to get a correct feedback. Anyways, so we have a bunch of stuff that we can talk about today for macro and markets, and we'll get into that in a minute. But there's a couple things that I want to get into first. The first one being lessons learned so far along the road that has been PYRESWAP, this mega project, and of course what we actually mean when we say highest real yield in DeFi and what we don't mean, like what applies to this statement and what doesn't apply to this statement. So then we'll go into macro and markets analysis for the rest of the show. So as far as lessons learned so far, generally speaking, I think the fact that that through the seasonal cycle of Web3, with it going through its own fads and its own novelties as it kind of launches projects, some of them saturate, some of them appear to achieve success, or at least what people think is success, and then they die off. The same way that these projects kind of differ in strategy and they differ in their own structure, they also differ in their own in their own marketing. So in the years where this project was getting ideated and designed, the marketing meta was positioned a little bit differently. Like where you would actually go to attract people or to get people's eyeballs vastly shifted, because generally speaking, I think that the underlying user base of Web3 also wasn't exactly the same. I think that right now we have a lot of attrition with the Web3 user base, where you have, I think, a significant fraction of people, they spend a little time in Web3 and then they lose their taste for it and then they don't come back. And I think that the amount of people that stay in, they continue to make money, and therefore they attract like a new user base. But generally speaking, even though we have, I think, a positive rate of adoption, or I guess what you could call adoption, a positive rate of maybe taking exposure, a positive rate of experimentation, you also have because of the large amount of attrition, you also have this kind of evolutionary chaos pool where what might have worked in the past doesn't work again in the future. And this Genesis event that we are in was originally designed with kind of the sentiment of the way marketing events were done in the past. Now, PYRESWAP is underlying a DEX. Like there's a DEX mechanism. It's actually a Uniswap V2 factory in the infrastructure of PYRESWAP. And arguably speaking, DEXs need Genesis events. Like that's exactly how Sushi Swap was started. And there was no really way of like circumventing this event, but I think it's possible that the amount of people that end up taking a risk on something new, that always appears to be the minority, and people feel great about taking a risk of something they've seen work in the past. That does in fact diminish the total possible rewards, but that's just part of the landscape in front of us. I hope I'm making sense. Meaning that when you see other DEXs launch, and these DEX launches already have like a sort of precedent about the way they go, even though this is not the first time that DEX is getting launched. For example, forks of Solidly, because there's a precedent established, people still feel like a risk reversal in place because they at least have data about the way that should look. That arguably tapers quite a bit of the reward, but it doesn't taper people's ability to speculate on it, which ends up being kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. DeFi tends to rinse and repeat and copy off the kid next to them a lot, because I think the risk of doing something new is so incredibly high that most people would prefer something that feels more safe, even though it's kind of less safe. I hope it makes sense. Additionally, one of the design features for this particular factory of PYRESWAP was a 0.7 swap fee. A 0.7% swap fee. I'm assuming you guys who are watching this might be familiar with us having this swap fee. This swap fee is high. It's meant to be high. It was designed to be high because for the first part of us beta testing the more novel utilities and implementations of PYRESWAP, we kind of wanted the amount of volume and the amount of activity on these charts to be a little bit dampered, to be a little bit deafened. Now the fact of the matter is that definitely worked, but what I was not aware of is that when you launch a fork of UniV2, this swap fee is baked in and it doesn't change. Like you can't necessarily taper the swap fee. That doesn't happen. So I hope that makes sense. In phase 2, we do in fact have a novel factory for PYRESWAP getting implemented, kind of like the V2 of PYRESWAP, but I think of it more of as a V1 of PYRESWAP. And that particular factory will have multiple tiers of swaps, including 0.1, 0.4, 0.7, and 1.0%. This right here is done obviously to address this problem that is kind of coming from the 0.7 fee, but it also arguably we also introduced a new version of it. So we're not scared of it being too high for certain pairs in certain contexts, but the fact of the matter is that since we are a very arbitrage friendly DEX, there's zero reason that we wouldn't also include a 0.1% fee to make the liquidity as slippery as possible, if that makes sense. Right now, for this 0.7%, there's no way to circumvent it. There's no going above or around it. We only go through it. At a certain amount, like at a certain point of value add or a certain amount of liquidity, it becomes negligible, right? Like the amount that you're willing to pay for something is all determined on the amount of benefit you esteem you get from it. The goal there is to make the amount of benefit esteemed from getting from it outweigh anything that this 0.7% could deter from. Hope that makes sense. Additionally, you can also arguably circumvent this 0.7 swap fee altogether, because you can effectively go buy the tokens necessary for Genesis from different DEXs, go bring it to PYRESWAP, deploy it as liquidity, put it into the Genesis pool, like the blue chip pools at least, and then collect PyroGas from it, which you can then use for active staking. I hope that makes sense. Generally speaking, when we first came up with when we first had this plan of PYRESWAP, the thing about this was being a mega dApp is that we acquired the social medias of Dibs, Frozen Tomb, and Snow Tomb, and we acquired the Zeom social media. So literally we acquired like a smaller Zeom server that became the 2 ohm and 3 ohm server as well. And we also acquired the Piggy Finance server, which ended up becoming the PYRESWAP server. So I want you guys to know something about the total wallets in the ecosystem prior to PYRESWAP existence. So we looked at all of the share coins. And by I mean all of the share coins, we were also looking at P share and C share. Hope that makes sense. We were looking at P share and C share. If you guys don't know what those coins are, don't worry about it. That'll be a topic for another time. And we found out that there was 18,000 total holders for the share tokens, meaning across 2 share, 3 share, Z share, FLOT and slot, and C share, and D share, and P share. There was 18,000 total holders. That was the holder sum. Now we did a scrutiny check to see how many of these holders were unique. Great news. Great news. 15,000 unique holders, unique wallet IDs. 15,000, it was roughly 15,000. I want to say it was like 15,100. This number here might have been like 18,300, something like this. But roughly 15,000 out of 18,000 are unique. This is about 5/6. Do you guys understand? Roughly 5/6. So when it came to Discord servers, we don't really know. It's impossible to do like an overlap check on Discord without getting extremely inventive. But we kind of assumed that we also had maybe 1/6 of overlap across servers. When it came to Twitter accounts, we also assumed maybe 1/6 of overlap. Does that make sense? So in our opinion, when we were acquiring these assets back in 2022 and early 2023, we already had a significantly large following. Does that make sense? Like every resource we gathered here, based on what worked for marketing in 2022, we weren't going to have any problems with marketing. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? Like we already had access to a very large audience. Okay. Now, other things that happened there were the fact that these servers or these Twitter accounts or even these Telegram channels, these Telegram groups, they don't necessarily maintain a prevalence in people's mind if you stop reinforcing the habit of people coming back to them, they lose their efficacy. Does that make sense? It's like the habit is not reinforced. Due to the fact that in 2023 we had developer attrition issues, I was not able to continue focusing on maintaining a presence in the Discords, in the Twitters like I wanted to. And I effectively had to focus more on becoming a project manager myself. And because of this, they became stale with their usage. I want to say on Twitter, this directly penalized our ability to get actual eyeballs, because I think that when a Twitter account kind of like resurfaces or kind of resurrects itself after experiencing non-use for a certain amount of months or years, it has a, let's say that it has jet lag. Does that make sense? Like the Twitter accounts that we have still experience, I guess what you could describe as jet lag. Does that make sense? Also, the Twitter business model changed. So the Twitter business model changed to the point where you're now buying a subscription, which gets you a blue check mark. These subscriptions also are limited by phone number, but they also allow you to reach more of your actual audience. Hope that makes sense as well. Yeah, see, it's because like the dust needs to be knocked off of them, if that makes sense. Like they need to kind of work their way back up to the point of getting their, C is saying, I was going to say low stamina. They are perhaps out of practice, let's put it that way. They have the muscle memory, but they still have to kind of get back into the habit of kind of being an activity channel. So on Twitter, due to the meta shifting in marketing, Twitter now matters like 80%. Like 80%, I want to say that maybe Twitter in 2022 was maybe like 20% or 30%. I barely use Twitter at all. And you could, in fact, through a series of, I guess you could say, like Discord server neighborhoods, there was more information happening through those and like Discord server alpha groups than there was through Twitter, because I think that the season was more focused on maybe a little bit more complicated projects, and on Twitter it can sometimes be difficult to kind of convey the type of information needed to be conveyed in just bite-sized tweets. I want to say the acquisition of Twitter and its pivoting of business model probably is what caused Twitter to become the majority platform. Like I believe that was kind of what was happening. Additionally, more and more of the platforms were effectively pivoting their business model to what they saw, as opposed to perhaps what they felt was going to be more aligned with really fulfilling the use case of Web3, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to besmirch any other project, but certain business models in Web3 are very, very transactional, and they don't really necessarily care about whether products live or die. So any sort of business model that kind of is fed from that, they're going to kind of effectively focus on projects and promoting projects that seem like they're doing very, very good in a small period of time, but not really perhaps aligning with anything like fundamental analysis or the actual growth of Web3 as a mature and actual usable space. I'm not going to nitpick on that too much, but really it's the fact that the majority of the user base and even the thought leaders have no idea how any of this works. So therefore, they just continue to brag about the most superficial indicators. And then therefore, they end up being the loudest greed bait, which then ends up attracting the biggest herd of they attract the biggest herd of people who also have no idea what they're doing. And this just ends up with like a bunch of, I guess you could say, pop-up cults that kind of lose steam after, the leader either runs out of steam or fails to deliver on promises or quits the project, or red candles kill the project. See, I am, but you know what? I'm thinking about it more and more, and there's probably a larger waveform pattern. Forgive me for not addressing this. So he says, he sounds like you're describing much all the meme coin laundry space. And, calling it even laundry implies that there's some sort of brain behind it, that they're washing money. They're not even doing that. Like, they could just use one of those de facto tornado cash systems for that. But rather, they're just probably rinsing retail of their hopes and dreams. That's probably the laundry that's taking place. Again, there's this concept called investor exhaustion, and they speak about it in Silicon Valley a lot, where during the ICO boom, the venture firms were very, very willing to throw money at any ICO, but at a certain point, due to saturation, they started avoiding it, right? Like they just had that boom and bust cycle happen. So effectively speaking, when there's the sentiment of something on the bust end of the cycle, even if it's something very similar to what was done in the past, you have to change the way you're communicating it because you're dealing with the negative sentiment of your previous competitors. So a lot of people ask why we don't focus more on the tomb fork aspect of this. I want you to understand tomb forks have a terrible reputation. When people describe tomb forks as Ponzi schemes, nobody objects to this. Nobody says, well, actually, you could think of them as a two-instrument bank if all you're willing to do is create a system to manage the debt. Nobody says that. The only person possibly who could say that would be me. So it's like I am in a shouting contest with thousands of other people having side conversations. It's very, very difficult for me to even explain what terminal utility is and why it makes a difference. We don't even mention terminal utility in the short version of the docs because it is completely immaterial to the paradigm shift that we need to create right now, which is arguably active staking. I want to describe that active staking is actually very, very powerful at creating deflation. I will get into that when we get into the highest real yield. But generally speaking, as far as lessons learned so far, the marketing climate is going to change, and until you have enough of your own platform that's resilient in enough places, you're going to have to change with it. So our original non-marketing strategy wasn't going to work because we didn't keep those assets warm. We let those assets chill while we were focusing on development. When the market came back with a fad called meme coins, and effectively this was a shouting match of utter nonsense. So if you guys understand that it might take more than literally 140, possibly even 280 characters to explain the value add of PYRESWAP, we have to dominate even more in that area. Like we have to crush everybody, and effectively we need to be just doing 5 times as much marketing as everybody else. Like that's going to be the minimum. Like honestly, 5 to 25 times as much. I'm committed to make this happen. And perhaps you should take solace in that. But yeah, these are the major lessons learned. And arguably, even after we perhaps moon the charts, as it were, we'll probably have to continue having a marketing presence because we're always in a shouting match for people's eyeballs. PYRESWAP has multiple phases of its roadmap, and for every new thing getting released, it's going to be new. And when it's going to be new, there's always the chance that we need to attract new user base to this new utility, this new mechanism, this new paradigm, this new concept. So therefore, we just need to always have this as background activity. and there's nothing. That's just part of cadence now. It requires the contribution of more than one person. So the stuff needed to get that in place is internal organizational labor, and that's what I've been working on a lot in August. Because the first week of August, I basically came to the conclusion that my approach to getting YouTubers to market us, which we did in May, that wasn't the approach. Like, that wasn't necessarily going to matter as much, because even YouTube does not matter as much as Twitter. Like, I would arguably say that maybe in the past it was like YouTube was maybe like 60%, and then Twitter was maybe like 20%, and you had like Telegram and fucking Discord here. And now, I guess I'll just call this X. Yeah, this is X, this is T, this is D, and this is maybe how it was in the past. And now, what seems to be the case is this is X, and then Discord, Telegram, and YouTube, or something like here. Do you guys see that? Let me pop these glasses on to make sure that I can see it. Then and now, yeah. Does that make sense? In fact, I have had YouTubers tell me this. Like, the YouTubers said, what's going on with Twitter? Twitter's everything right now. And I'm like, you know what? You're completely fucking correct. And the only thing we can do there is utilize the fact that we have so many Twitter accounts. That's just something that needs to something that needs its own processes happening in the background. Does that make sense to everybody? Jet lagged as fuck. Thank you, C. Okay, Pega says, since we are quite deep into Genesis V2, what's your take on Genesis running out before we are done with marketing? Again, Pega, it's obviously immaterial then. Does that make sense? I'll tell you this, Pega. We don't even necessarily need to market for the Genesis. Like, the Genesis is like a bonus thing, but the fact of the matter is we can just market for the decks in general. And like, the fact of the matter is that like bringing new users in will effectively help the Genesis. If they learn about the Genesis and they're believers in the project, they'll enter the Genesis. We're about 1 month into this Genesis. Pega, if you're not aware, we taper the emissions. We will likely continue tapering the emissions. Does that make sense? Because what needs to happen there is if you guys want to see the chart uptick, like unequivocally uptick and uptrend, what needs to happen is the rate of deflation needs to outpace inflation. And that involves both transactions and contraction and expansion. Meaning, we need stuff that's, the buying needs to outpace the selling, and the burning needs to outpace the fucking minting. Does that make sense? So right now, the minting outpaces the burning, and the selling outpaces the buying. There's not really a mystery why the chart is doing what it's doing. We reduced the expansion rate because, like I said yesterday, when we had to launch a Genesis version 2, it was already kind of professionally embarrassing. So I thought, like, okay, the least I can do is jack them up APR all the way up to 4.6. Arguably, the fact that we had so much stalling with marketing in July, that didn't help the price chart. Now, it did help the people in Genesis who are probably holding a small fortune illiquid, but they, of course, are waiting now on the price to recover for that fortune to actually feel like a fortune. Does that make sense? Like, they're all still holding, you know what I mean? Again, we do very, very good as far as like retaining the real believers, right? But the fact of the matter is, in order to attract a new user base, you want a bunch of superficial indications that it's a good project. We are, in fact, tapering the chart right now. You might not feel like we're tapering the chart, but we already did that through the emissions getting reduced. We will taper them again. Likely, we will taper them from 3% to 1.75%, and then we will taper from 1.75% to 1%. Yeah, that might be over the next few weeks, if that makes sense. Us getting to 1% daily is probably small enough where we can get into an uptrend. The reason why is because there's already transaction pressure happening on PYREGAS from the Incantation Witch Vault itself. Does that make sense? Like, there's already volume happening on it because PYREGAS gets used as a conduit for arbitrage. Does that make sense? And then also, the incantation itself does put buy pressure on the chart. So, the fact that, yeah, our liquidity is much deeper now too. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah, like the Genesis is still going to be there. We're not going to turn the Genesis off. But Genesis, it needs to happen, but like it's just part of the marketing now, as opposed to maybe like the major focus. That's the answer. Yeah. In general, the messaging for PYRESWAP can be variegated. So like certain aspects, like again, the fact that we have a Genesis is not our unique value add. There's Genesis events all over the place. Our unique value add is the fact that we have the highest real yield in DeFi, which is now what we'll get into. And let's eliminate this, and we can get back to macro markets here in a second. When we talk about the highest real yield in DeFi, here are things that we don't care about. Yeah, immaterial to the statement. The swap fee. The swap fee is not a variable in the equation of what is the highest real yield in DeFi. Other things that don't matter. Percent change in token price. This does not matter to the highest real yield. This is not a fucking factor. Other things that aren't factors are the current weather in Cancun. We don't give a shit about the weather in Cancun. So when you talk about the swap fee, you might as well be talking about the weather in Cancun. You might as well be talking about, I don't know, the life expectancy of your favorite celebrity. Like, it doesn't fucking matter. Let's see. The box office performance. Box office numbers for the latest Marvel movie, okay? This is also immaterial to talking about the highest real yield in DeFi, okay? Does that make sense? We're not talking about the swap fee. We're not talking about the amount of price impact. Doesn't fucking matter. Yeah. Like as irrelevant as the style of wood that's being used for the tiling in this room. Like, it's immaterial. Like, we don't care about that at all. We are only talking about the highest real yield. And when we talk about yield, we're talking about an instrument that collects yield as like a dividend. There are other like yield instruments like bonds. It deliberately is a dividend, like there's a quantity being increased. It is the quantity being increased on like a principal amount. Why so cynical? The answer is yes. Yeah, I'll just reply to this right here. And you are encouraged to watch the recording. These are things that don't matter. The price impact doesn't matter. The depth of liquidity doesn't matter. The percent change in token price. And what I mean by that is, if the price chart went 900% green tomorrow, that does not change the number of the highest real yield in DeFi. We have not really increased our highest real yield in DeFi with this 900% change. If we crashed 90% tomorrow, this also would not affect the highest real yield in DeFi. When we talk about the highest real yield in DeFi, we are only talking about the numbers that you can screenshot on the IWV dashboard. That's all we're talking about. It is literally the isolation of that performance right there. Not all money is money. Like, again, these things are not fungible with each other. So it is, in fact, apples to orange to compare that. Like, when we talk about the highest real yield in DeFi, we're not lying. It's not a buzz phrase. Like, this is a fucking finance textbook satisfactory equivalent term. Like, if I had to go and teach this in a college classroom to a bunch of people with finance degrees, I would describe it like this. I wouldn't say like, oh, but when you think about swap fee and price impact, that is immaterial. Yeah, just as immaterial as the weather in Cancun, the box office numbers for the Deadpool movie, and things like price impact or the swap fee. The swap fee is going to be changed to, again, the structure I described before. Does that make sense? That change will not affect this at all. It is immaterial. Does everyone understand what I mean? We literally only mean, in fact, if you could go back to Discord and you could go to the screenshot of, I think, Why So Cynical's performance maybe an hour or two ago. Yeah, you can just scroll up. Yeah, it'd probably be around 2 hours previous for us. No, it would be an actual screenshot of the actual dashboard, but it's pretty close. I think. There you go. Is that always zoomed in? Is it possible to zoom in? Okay, anyways, let me see where to put these glasses. Okay, right there, the EPR number, the DPR number, the APR number, that is stuff that applies to real yield. Does that make sense? The realness of it is really just EPR. The realness of it is just EPR. The DPR and the APR is projections, but they are projections based on this real yield number, right? So the EPR there is real yield. Additionally, the numbers at the bottom where he has 322,740 staked, and then he ends up with 6,099.7860. That number applies to real yield. Like, it's just that number. Yield is not like... Yield has one denominator. So 6,099.786 divided by 322,740. That right there is real yield. It is only these two factors. It is only these two factors. It is literally 6th grade level fucking algebra. It does not require a calculus degree. We are only looking at these two numbers. Does that make sense? This is what we have. This is amazing. If you don't understand this is amazing, you don't really understand it at all. I don't really expect you guys to do it, but the fact of the matter is, this is a screenshot of an isolated incident where legitimately, even in the conditions we're experiencing now, somebody's capturing 3% real yield in a 5-minute window. So again, we're talking about 3% real yield in a window less than 5 minutes in a market experiencing downturns. That is the highest real yield in DeFi. A lot of people, I think, don't understand like when something small is able to scale. But like this number is impressive whether Pyre AVAX is $100 or whether it's 100 pennies. Okay? Pega, there's a fraction over there. Pega asks, is it still real yield and we have gratuity? That's a great question. It is still partially real yield. You could argue that it is having a booster of a fake yield. We're boosting with fake yield. But the fact of the matter is that, Pega, you might remember that before Genesis, it was still, we could still see these numbers on the dashboard. Yeah. So the fact of the matter is that also after Genesis, it will still be the highest real yield. Yeah. Also, additionally, Pega, keep in mind, Pega, you can also keep in mind that lots of people aren't even claiming all the time right now. Does that make sense? So like claiming frequency is also kind of low. So I would say that maybe less than 50% of the people in Genesis are claiming every day. So therefore it is still real yield commonly even during Genesis, or arguably pretty close to real yield. I'm going to actually talk more about the actual deflation powers. Do you guys understand this math? Okay, back to me on camera. Oh, I am, but this is frozen. Okay. Got it. Okay. This number, this is the real yield. It's these two factors. It's this number divided over this number, and that's a percentage. And that's it. That's real yield. We are talking about an objective parameter. It has nothing to do with the temperature in Cancun. It has nothing to do with the Deadpool movie's box office numbers. It has nothing to do with the amount of calories you consume in a day. Yeah. Swap fee doesn't matter. Price impact doesn't matter. Liquidity depth doesn't matter. I'll also talk about this on price impact. For those of you who don't understand that our DEX is a little bit different in liquidity, the price impact you're actually seeing is not the price impact you're actually receiving. So when you see price impact, and it equals something like 5%, do you guys understand that this is 5% only on the liquidity pair you're transacting through there for that transaction? Do you guys understand that? So if you're selling Pyre Phantom to Phantom, and it says price impact is 5%, do you guys think that you're actually going to get 5% of price impact? And do you guys understand why you aren't? Do you guys understand the question? Okay, Pyre Phantom is in multiple liquidity pools. So after you have a 5% transaction, arbitrage bots come through and they eliminate most of this price impact. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Maddie. Yes, Maddie, I'm honestly very impressed that you understood that. I'll tell you that lot less people understand that. Yeah, lots of people don't understand that. If you have 5% price impact, you're not actually moving the price by 5% because the arbitrage bots are going to eliminate, they're going to sweep that gap up. So you're going to be corrected probably 3%. Yeah, so a 5% price impact in RUI is probably more like a 2% price impact. Were you guys aware of this? I forget sometimes how little is understood about these, so I apologize. That I perhaps didn't go over these concepts. But the SushiSwap SDK, which we use for our front end, they don't approach liquidity with that type of concept. So they just think about price impact on that liquidity pair. That's the amount that you're changing the price. It doesn't have anything to do with the amount of tokens you're receiving. If you eliminate 5% of your transaction, but then immediately after 3% is removed, then you didn't really experience 5% price impact as a hidden tax to your swap. Maddie, again, yeah. I don't think you're correct. Yeah. No, Pega, you won't, because if they're arbitraging it back, they're raising the price of what you just did. Yeah, so you're hit by 5 and then immediately returned by 4. Yeah, like there's your net price impact. The rest of the chat, because I'm going to move on. Okay, so we're going to talk about the deflationary, the deflation versus the inflation of PYREGAS. So right now, I want to say in that screenshot we saw earlier, we're looking at like 600,000 Pyre Phantom was being used in a round. We're gonna do some scenario analysis. So we're gonna say we have a total supply of like 6 million. Okay. Then you're going to have. Let's say 600,000 is getting staked. So I guess we can talk about this 24-hour high or whatever. 600,000, okay? And let's say you have 10 players. And we'll just call them stakers, actually. Pega, that's not how that works. Yeah, that's not how that works. Yeah, the bot is trading between two liquidity pairs. He has nothing to do with the swapper. He's in fact bringing the other liquidity pairs into parity. So he is in fact reducing the price of a pair that you didn't swap through, and he's increasing the price of the pair you swapped through. So your total price impact is split across the pools. So the 5% is not going to happen. It's going to get reversed. Does that make sense? Because they're like the arbitrage bot is not transacting with the swapper, he's transacting with the LPer. So I'll let Maddie do it. I'll let Maddie do this. Okay, stakers, we're gonna say we have 10 because this is actually realistic. So okay, if we're talking about Pyre Phantom, I think it's over 6 million now, but we're just gonna round it to 6 million. If we have the high staked amount, we see 600,000. Would you guys say this is like a semi-realistic number? And if we have 10 stakers, let's just say, yeah. Pega, I want nothing more than to be able to do videos on just DEX mechanics all day long, like 100%. But we still have the market discussion to do today. Although I feel great today. Yeah, we might just do a little long today, but yeah, I feel great. So let's assume that you have. Let's assume, by the way, we're making the assumption that we're gonna say that they all stake with 60,000, which they don't. I know that literally it's why so cynical staking with like 40% of this, but let's just say that it's 60 grand each. Let's assume 60,000 each. Okay? Okay, so we have 10 stakers. They're staking with 60,000 Pyre Phantom each. The total amount that's being staked is 600,000, and the total supply is 6 million. Does everyone understand these numbers? Okay, fantastic. So when we have 10 stakers, we're talking about smoldering. In theory, 9 times, but we'll round it to like 10 smolders. We'll just say 10 because it's easier to do math, right? So let's say like round to like 10 smolders. Like actually 9. But I'm going to say 10 because 10's easier because when you do 9 compounding, it kind of feels like it would be half anyway. So if staker number 1 is going to get smoldered 10 times and staker at the end is going to get smoked 0 times, what would you say is the average amount of smoldering per staker? Like, what would you say is the average amount of smoldering per user? If 10 is the high, let's say 1 is the low for whatever reason, because maybe adding 0 makes it weird. Yeah, about 5. About 5. Yeah. Yeah. So 5 smolders. 5 smolders average. Does that make sense? Now, Dr. Mack writes 5%, but what we actually mean this to be 0.5%. Does that make sense? 0.5% of the stake position. Making sense? Does that make sense? So like the average amount of smoldering on this amount is 0.5%. So when we have this staked high amount, we really mean to say that we're probably talking about like a 3,000 of this is getting burned. Does that make sense? So we have 3,000 of this getting burned in an epoch. Does that make sense? Yep, thank you for understanding. Does everyone understand what I mean when I say 3,000 is getting burned per epoch? Everyone clear on that? $3,000 burned per epoch. Follow me? Everyone follow me? Okay, so 3,000 is getting burned per epoch. Everybody follows me there? 3,000 is roughly, again, I guess it would be half a percentage of this, which is then 1/10 of that, right? Roughly, what we're describing right here. I'm gonna let Maddie discuss that. Yeah, that's not really for me, but yeah, that's effectively well, I'm not gonna sit down, but okay, 3,000 burned per epoch. So if you have 3,000 burned per epoch, that's what, 12,000 burned a day? If you extrapolate. $12,000 daily. C, literally, okay, C has a question. He says, how much 2-ohm was burned per epoch? C, when meterage is profitable, as much as 1% of 2-ohm's total supply can be meted per epoch, which does in fact burn it. Yep, but 2-ohm, the 3 peg coins of the tomb forks, they can be burned at a faster rate but less frequent than Pyre Phantom, which burns at a smaller rate but more consistently. I'm hoping this makes sense to everybody. These are different waveforms. Okay, so if you have 12,000 daily getting burned, and this is you're looking at 0.5 here. Sorry, you're looking at, if this was this, it would be 2% of this, which is 1/10 of this. So your daily, the IWV is capable in the current configuration where everybody is like, is this project going to start marketing? Is there going to be green candles fine? In the current configuration, in this level of sadness, it's capable of burning 0.2% of its total supply daily. So we have a 1% contraction in its total supply every 5 days, or probably more. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Now, I know that like when you have a really hyper-inflative genesis, maybe that doesn't seem like it's a lot. That's insane. That's insane. Does that make sense? 1% every 5 days. I know that like 1% per epoch or 1% daily is something that people look. But I want you guys to understand that in like TradFi, if we were talking about 365, Dan, do we not have a calculator on this computer? Okay. Let me do it in my head. Hang on. It's 73, right? 365 divided by 5 equals 73. Did I get that math correct mentally? Thank you so much to my producer, who without I would be lost. And I'm gonna pin this to the taskbar. Just let me just make that happen. Okay, yep. 365 divided by 5 equals 73. Okay, thankfully my wits were with me this morning. Okay, thank you so much, ZeroKex. There's nothing better than social proof, am I right? Anyways, so again, I want you to understand that this thing burns 1% of its supply 73 times a year. During a Genesis event, I understand that this can get obfuscated from the fact that we are literally fire hosing tokens like t-shirts into a drunk crowd at a fucking stadium event. I understand. It is in fact confetting the token around. We will not be doing this forever. This token will get extremely scarce, extremely fast. Again, it's capable of reducing its supply. This is not even 73%. It's actually 73. It's actually 1% to the power of 73, right? So let me look at that math. Do we have the ability to make this a better calculator? Let me try scientific. Let me try graphing maybe. No, that's not it. Scientific. So what I'm actually going to do instead is I'm going to do 0.99 to the power of 73. Okay. So literally this thing cuts its supply in half in a year. And this does that with literally completely decentralized aspects. I know that this might not be fast enough for fucking degen or whatever, but like, believe me, this will get extremely fast, especially when you think about increasing the user base, which increases the smolder rate. Because increasing the user base alone, it's either going to increase volume on the DEX, which makes the green candles higher, or it'll increase the amount of people playing. 10 players in Epoch, it's capable of cutting its supply in half every year. Imagine if we had 20. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like, I understand that compounding math is not intuitive, but like, that's why this works. I understand that we are at the tiny part of the curve where it's hard to see whether we're sloping up or sloping down or going sideways. But again, with 10 players, yeah, Matty, that's with 10 stakers in Epoch. 10 smolders in Epoch. 48% a year with step phase. This is our baby step phase. I didn't make us the most hyper-inflated Genesis of all time because I didn't know this math. Does that make sense? I realized maybe I should have taught this math to more people in the community. Yeah, Matty, exactly. Yeah, like again, like I know that it's really, really difficult to pull what's out of my brain and to convey it into others. I recognize that this is like my cross to bear in this world. It is my gift I can share with this world. I do so willingly. I do so, yeah, I would, yeah. I do so till the day I die. Yeah, and I do so until I do so until I revolutionize finance globally in the minds and the hearts of mankind. This is all that I exist for. But again, 10 players per epoch, and we are capable of crushing the supply of a token by 48% in a year. 10 players. Baby steps. If we had 20, if we had 30, if we had 40, I can't, I'm not even going to do the math. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Because we can now get into macro and markets analysis for the week. Yay! We're going to get more fancy banners to slap over the stream. Yeah, like more. We have one with the PYRESWAP.com and the QR code and the Twitter logo in it. We got some good stuff coming, guys. Yeah, we're gonna have content repurposing going. I'm literally gonna, I'm gonna start handing out signs to the homeless around Austin, and it says "Will active stake for food." You know what I mean? Just to get people fucking talking. I'm kidding. We're not doing that. But I have thought about giving them hats. You know what I mean? Like sun hats. We're in Central Texas, and it is August, and they might just do better with a PYRESWAP hat. You know what I mean? With QR codes on the brim and stuff. Does that make sense? And arguably, they could tell people in the street, they could say, hey, any money you donate to me, you'll make back 48% fold with active staking. And then just got to tap on their brim and point to the QR code. Do you guys see the vision? Okay, thankfully you guys have a sense of humor. Otherwise this project wouldn't work. Well, Maddie, you know what? Understand that it might take 90 days if we have 20 stakers. And it might take 60 days if we have 30 stakers. Do you get what I'm saying? For half the supply to go away. Like literally, if we have 30 stakers, it might take 60 days to collapse the supply in half. Do you guys understand the math there? I could do the math, but like, I'm not going to. How about that? You guys can do the math. And I told you 40, like half a year with 10 stakers in Epoch. I know nobody wants to wait a whole year. I agree. We're going to make it happen faster than that because we're going to be doing marketing. We will scale the user base. We will win. This is a mega dApp. This project is not going to fail. Red candles can't kill this project. That's not a buzz phrase. Like it really can't. There are people that understand this now. The Genesis will not last forever, and we're tapering emissions. The scarcity will show up because this token always has transaction volume, even if it's not enough to make your serotonin and dopamine in the green zone, okay? Even if it's not enough to dispel your cortisol day per day. But I want you to understand, I am not deaf or blind or numb to the way that you hear or see or think or feel, okay? Like I am there with you. I'm in every position with you. We're going to make it. Yeah. If I'm able to put these ideas into your heads, I can put these ideas into other people's heads. It's not a miracle. It's not magic. Like there are people in general chat that are very, very literate about the way this works. Yeah. Thank you, Javery. It's my favorite version as well. You can decide to be bullish every day. Optimism returns for the market. Optimism returns. Goldman Sachs no longer feels a recession. Goldman Sachs is now, I guess you could say, unclenching their cheeks. Okay, guys? First of all, if I could survey you guys just in chat, if you were to look at the last 2 years and I were to say there was a recession in the last 2 years, or I said, hey guys, there was no recession in the last 2 years, which version do you think is more believable? Like, which one do you guys believe is more true? Yeah, okay. Well, good news, Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs has now become a mouthpiece for propaganda, I guess. Thank you, ZeroKex. Thank you, Javery. Yep. Yes, a lipstick recession. I agree. Yes, a recession with confetti. A recession with... in fact, we can talk about a piece of legislation here in a minute. The S&P 500 is up 6%, over 6% in the last week. The NASDAQ, which is a little bit tech heavier, is up 8% over the last week. The CPI and PPI inflation data for July was a little bit softer than expected. So that kind of helps other people unclench their cheeks and helps them loosen their fucking solar plex, okay? Remember how important physiological sighing is, you guys, right? Make sure to listen to your Andrew Huberman, all right? The Fed will be having its Jackson Hole symposium later this week. Did you guys know that? Do you guys know where Jackson Hole is? Jackson Hole is a small little town in Wyoming, but it's in Wyoming, and the Fed has a symposium there as every year. For those of you who don't know, Jackson Hole, Wyoming is like a community of billionaires, or rather, there's like just there are more billionaires per capita in Jackson Hole, Wyoming than any other city or any other town or county in the United States of America. So not New York City, not San Francisco, Jackson Hole, Wyoming has the largest amount of billionaires in its population. Yep, it's a valley in Teton County, and the Federal Reserve has been having their symposium there every year, almost every year. They did stop for COVID, but they were having these since 1981. So for those of you who know Fed history, a chairman known as Paul Volcker, who is considered to be like the most sainted of Federal Reserve bankers. Yeah, it is a wild stat. Paul Volcker picked Jackson Hole because he loved fly fishing, and Jackson Hole apparently has fly fishing. I guess, all that time on the East Coast, they don't really get to experience the scenery of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. You can see from this picture on Wikipedia that it looks very scenic, where you have this little farm, and then in the background you have these snow-capped mountains. It's truly truly postcard country, if that makes sense to you guys. You could honestly take a picture there that might even make it up as a Windows background. You know what I mean? You guys know what I mean? You guys know what I mean? Anyways. So since 1981, they've been doing their symposium there. Fly fishing's great. Coincidentally, not sure if it's a coincidence, most billionaires per capita in the United States. You can look at home prices by county, and you can see home prices 2021. Teton County has some of the most expensive homes on average. Weird. Fucking weird. Additionally, this week, the National Association of Realtors will be releasing its annual home market stats. So for those of you who don't know, the NAR, believe it or not, is a gigantic trade union. And in 2017 and 18, the ICO that I was working with, they were actually a blockchain-based project that was meant to destroy the NAR. Did you guys know that? Because the NAR is kind of like this crazy monopoly that was kind of chokeholding commissions for a while. They recently got sued, I want to say in the last couple of years, about non-competitive practices, because apparently commissions were too high. I can't comment on that. But the NAR will be releasing its home buying data for the year. And of course, real estate being as fundamental as it is, will that's an economic climate indicator that will be happening on Thursday of this week. We might talk about it on Thursday. Additionally, Treasury Secretary, let me see what else we got. Hang on. Okay. Janet Yellen She is the Treasury Secretary. She also formerly was a Fed chair. There you go. Janet Yellen on screen. Amazing. Yeah, she's got a sharp blazer game herself. Yeah, I dig it. Popped collar and everything. What a fucking boss. Okay. So Janet Yellen, as recently as August 16th, is a Tweety bird. In fact, Javery, what she did was she tweeted praise. Tweeted praise for, do you guys know? Do you guys know what she tweeted? The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. So what we recently had this last week was the 2-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, I'm actually going to pull that up here because I actually have that already up as a tab. You see that right here? So the first thing I want to show you guys here is the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is a landmark federal law which aims to reduce the federal government budget deficit. Not necessarily something that creates inflation, but it is what it is. It lowers prescription drug prices and invests in domestic energy while promoting clean energy. It was passed on August 16th, 2022. Does that make sense? So it's 2 years old now in 2 days, okay, by President Joe Biden. So it's a budget reconciliation bill, blah, blah, blah. The bill was the result of negotiations on the proposed Build Back Better Act. Anyways, it was unanimously, it was voted by all Democrats and it was voted against by all Republicans. So according to the nonpartisan CBO, so again, nonpartisan CBO and the Joint Committee on Taxation, the law will raise $738 billion from tax reform to lower prices. Interesting. And then it will also authorize $891 billion in total spending. So in order to reduce inflation, there's going to be a bunch of spending, which is kind of like pumping the chart of the economy. And it also includes a large expansion of the IRS, meaning this Inflation Reduction Act increases the IRS's manpower by 87,000 people. Additionally, the CBO, which is a nonpartisan organization, projected it would have a negligible effect on inflation. It's not funny, but it's funny. It's just the standard comedy that you see from the world of politics. You know what? Like, again, some of this money did go to nuclear energy, which I'm not against, but less than 10% of it went to nuclear energy. Less than 10% of the green energy spending went to nuclear energy. So, like, I think that I'm not going to keep talking about that. That's not the point of this. That's not the point of this. That is not the point of this show. But yeah, anyways, the nonpartisan committee predicted it would have a negligible effect on inflation. This really goes to say that you can like put a title on anything, and fuck it, man. Yeah, laughable indeed. Anyways, we are right about now around the hour mark. Does anyone have any questions about anything we covered today? If not, we can go over it tomorrow. I think there was something yesterday I was gonna go over, but I think it had to do with the deflation ability of the IWV. With 10 people, fuck man, I really think that these ought to be diagrams as well. But literally, 10 stakers in Epoch, which arguably is not our target at all. 10 stakers in Epoch is like a fucking poker game in the neighbor's house. Does that make sense? Like, this is a very, very small population. Does that make sense? At 10 stakers in Epoch, in a year, you will burn half the supply. That's 10 stakers in Epoch. That's insanely, that burns insanely fast. The reason why the chart is in a downtrend is that I printed so much money because I already knew that it can burn so fucking fast. There is not really a better terminal utility than witch vaults. There are terminal utilities that burn tokens faster than the IWV, but I want you guys to know they are more complex witch vaults. Does that make sense? So there has been some sentiment that more terminal utilities should be implemented. The ones that can burn faster than this are more advanced and more powerful versions of this. So we need to actually continue spreading the idea of this first, because we're not going to have a community that can understand the more advanced things until we get, again, a few hundred people who at least have the idea in their heads of how it works. Does that make sense? When we talk about 300 daily users, they don't necessarily need to be even smoldering. They don't need to be stakers. They could be people that are in fact trading the incantation, because when you increase the user base and increase the liquidity, you end up with more and more scarcity, which ends up with more and more volume, which ends up with more and more of the velvet rope pattern. Does that make sense? So we will be tapering our emissions to bring the velvet rope pattern back out from the shadows, because I think right now the velvet rope pattern is suppressed by inflation. Does that make sense? It's being suppressed. I agree with that. I'm not denying that. The 0.7% swap fee also hinders almost everything on the DEX. The reason that the avalanche side sometimes hangs up, you guys know how the transpiration of Epoch hangs up, also caused by the 0.7 swap fee. There is nothing we can do about that now other than push through it. Like, we're just going to do 3 times the work that we would have to with like a 0.4 or a 0.2 swap fee. Whatever. I'm not going to cry. I'll just fucking do the work. But anyways, terminal utilities that burn crazier amounts, one of them is called the DWV. And the DWV is dueling witch vaults. Dueling witch vaults. This is an interface with 4 different witch vaults on the same fucking page. And the witch vaults are in fact controlling each other's smolder rate. So when you stake in this one, it changes the parameter of smoldering in another one. It's an incredibly chaotic game. We don't have the fucking user base to play Dueling Witch Vaults. That's more like a phase 4 terminal utility, believe me. But yes, Dueling Witch Vaults, which is again, imagine like we have one IWV. Imagine if you had 4 of them. And now imagine if, now Winter Horse says, whoa. Now imagine if these, not only with Pirate Phantom, they also accepted 2-ohm and 3-ohm. Because when we talk about duels, they're actually intra-night battles. So literally, Dueling Witch Vaults burn so much. And then down here, these ones stake Pyre, which is again the phase 2 token. So when you stake Pyre, you can increase the smoldering rate of the diagonal Witch Vault. It's a much more complicated game. I cannot release this or even ask the devs to build this until we get past phase 1. I apologize, but again, within phase 1, we have the ability to burn so much token. It is called PYRESWAP. I promise you, the burning things on this decks are unheard of. Yeah, I'm not going to say ruined my life. I'm going to say I committed my life to showing how feasible terminal utility is in the DApp layer. Chains like Ethereum and AVAX and arguably Phantom and Glimmer, they burn when they get used as gas. And that is an example of terminal utility getting used on chains. What we don't see very much of is terminal utility getting used on dApps. That is really what we're debuting here. This is the evolutionary step. Like, hey, by the way, you can also create token supply changes through the user base just interacting with each other. Yes, PYRESWAP, Pyre, not Hydro Swap, not Massage Swap, not Forehead Kisses Swap, not Inflation Swap. It's not Inflation Swap. Again, the lessons learned from the part of this PYRESWAP show is that, like, hey, high APR Genesis events used to be what everybody wanted, and the meta just changed. That is perhaps my inability to see how much other projects are making it harder for me for my inability to have a KOLness already by already not having a following, not having an engaged following. Oh well, all I can do is suck it up and just get back to work. And I will. Does anyone have any concerns or questions about anything I discussed? Handhold swap? Yeah. Yeah, no, like this thing will burn fucking tokens. Like it will burn tokens. It's not, when we talk about small things happening, you have to simulate and extrapolate to see what it can scale to. But again, with 10 people in Epoch, it'll burn half its supply in the year. On top of putting net buy pressure. When you're in a Genesis, you might not see that. But like, even if we have only 145 days left, again, here's what I promise you guys. We will not do a Genesis version 3. Does that make sense? And Genesis version 2, we will be tapering the emissions. Okay? We will make the scarcity felt for this token. All 3 of them. Okay? But in addition to tapering emissions, we also need to increase the user base because this is a project that deserves to have a larger user base. More people in DeFi deserve to learn about this project. Yeah. I really am not in it for me. Does that make sense? Like, I have a hero complex, okay? If this was just my own financial gain, I would just be a trader or something like that. Does that make sense? That just doesn't salivate in my mouth. Does that make sense? Like, I have the heart of a soldier, as someone told me once. Does that make sense? So, like, this is a mission project. If you guys have ever read Jeff Bezos before, he talks about the concepts of missionaries. And he talks about mercenaries. Do you guys know about the dichotomy of missionary and mercenary? Do you guys know about this? So when he talks about entrepreneurs, he's talking about 2 types of entrepreneurs. Missionary and mercenary. Do you guys know about this? Has anyone ever read Jeff Bezos' shareholder letters or the book? Okay. Missionary. They build a business with with an impact target, with an impact goal, meaning they're trying to change the world in some way. Mercenaries with an income goal. Does that make sense? There's actually a podcast called Impact Theory, hosted by a guy named Tom Bilyeu, and it's also based around the concept of impact versus income, or mercenary versus missionary. Do you guys understand the dichotomy? Impact goals versus income goals. Can you guys still hear me? Are you guys following what I'm saying right here? Okay. Who do you guys think ends up making more money? Yeah, ironically and poetically, who do you guys think ends up making more money? Yeah, the missionary does. Yeah, the missionary does. Because money is not really wealth. Money is the shadow of wealth. Okay? Money is not really value. Money is the wake of value. Does that make sense? So the fact of the matter is that if you want to make a lot of money, you got to build something that casts a large money shadow. If you're just after income, I mean, you can make like a solid 6 figures a year. You can make, $1 million a year as a trader or whatever. You can maybe sell trading courses on Instagram, whatever. Does that make sense? Yeah. I figured this out. I figured this out before I read Jeff Bezos, but when he put it this way, I understood it more than ever. Jeff Bezos bought Whole Foods because it wasn't a mercenary project. So when Amazon makes an acquisition, rarely is they ever acquiring mercenary companies. Does that make sense? Because Jeff Bezos was trying to make the most customer-centric company in the world when he built Amazon. Winder, thank you so much for asking that question. Yeah, everyone, yes. Shout out to the female version of Jeff. Finally, you guys are taking shifts. Like, if you have a fucking mission, there isn't gonna be a money goal where suddenly I'm like, okay guys, we're good, I'm gonna fucking retire now. That just isn't in my soul. That's just not in my nature. PYRESWAP is really just the proof of my theoretics, okay? It's not so much that I need to prove how good my theoretics are. It's the fact that I have become convinced that my theoretics can change the future of the globe to the tune of trillions of dollars, or whatever dollars will be in the future. But it has to start somewhere, and it's going to start right now in this set we built in my fucking living room with the decks that we forged from UniV2 that I did with 3 volunteer devs living on 3 different fucking continents. And we did all this through an obstacle course of adversity that would have just leveled any other team. Do you know why? Because you're never going to build anything great in Web3 if you don't have a mission behind it. Because in Web3, if you only have an income goal, at some point, the money's going to go sideways. Shit, look at the Pyre gas charts. The money is sideways. What's going on with the money? Right? Good thing that we have a fucking mission. Otherwise, this would be one of those trash projects that dies from red candles. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Red candles can't kill this project. I can die, but red candles can't kill PYRESWAP. They can't. The thing that needs to happen is for the user base to be big enough where it does have arguably that thing that happens to meme coins where the community is now big enough where it kind of never loses the community. Does that make sense? Right? So we do need to grow the community. But like again, we're already doing that in leaps and bounds. There are people in the chat right now that weren't here in March, that weren't here in April, that weren't here in February, that weren't here in December, that weren't here in 2023, and definitely weren't here in 2022. Okay? We are growing the community. Literally in the gospel, Jesus tells people that you just go into the towns and you go seek people out. And if they don't listen to your message, you should kick the dirt from your sandals as a testament against them. Does that make sense? When it comes to promotion, when it comes to marketing, there are going to be people that just don't hear your message, but you just keep going. Winner, what a great question. I will tell you how to spread the word. And to be honest, Winner, you're already doing a great job with your TikTok shenanigans. But yeah, Winner, we have a Zeely community under construction right now. Are you guys familiar with Zeely? Do you guys know about Zeely? Okay, so Zeely is Zeely is like it's like gamified community building. Does that make sense? So you actually like gain XP and you like level up your profile, and you can do giveaway contests on Zeely. Does that make sense? Arguably, us tapering emissions is great because we can use Zeely for marketing with more tokens. Does that make sense? Because like we will, if we're tapering inflation on the Genesis side, we can give more tokens out to Zeely contributors. Zeely contributions later involve things like inviting people to the Discord, retweeting us. Yes, Seabiscuit, but I would say Zeely is not complete yet. One of the major things that we need to put on Zeely are quizzes. I have about 50 quiz questions done, but I'm not prioritizing building Zeely right now. What I'm actually prioritizing is getting a few more people into the Senior Circus to actually build this this marketing powerhouse team, this marketing and content fucking powerhouse team. And it doesn't take that many people, and it's very, very part-time, and it can be just a few things a day, a few things a week even. But when we have this all kind of chaotically happening, we're gonna build that stochastic kind of pot that begins boiling to eventually what begins again with like a small flame, or what begins with just like a small bubble, ends up exciting the whole fucking pot. So think about this. Imagine that we are boiling a pot of water on a stove, if you will. I'm pointing towards where there's a stove, actually. And yeah, off screen, we're not going to look at the stove. Do not ask about the stove, but there is a stove over there in case you guys are wondering. Imagine if a stove was actually cube-shaped. Does that make sense? Imagine if it was like a... This is kind of a shitty one, but okay. It'll probably be better like this, right? And you connect this to this, and this to this, and this to this, and this to this. Do you guys understand this is a cube? Can you guys see that? It's roughly a cube. Yeah. Okay. Imagine if instead of a pot being cylindrical, it was in fact cube-shaped. And every face of this cube was in fact another angle through which to excite attention. So first things first, 6 faces. And let's say it's actually only 5. Let's say that we take one off. Does that make sense? Let's assume that we're boiling water in like a cubic pot that has an open top, but it's got 4 walls and a fucking and a base. Making sense? And then even here down at the bottom, we're talking about stickers or fucking billboards. Does that make sense? Because we're talking about YouTube, we're talking about Twitter, we're talking about Zeely, we're talking about TikTok, we're talking about stickers. We actually have more than 5. I'm not even gonna get into everything we have. Does that make sense? But the fact of the matter is the reason you boil a pot is because it's metal, and metal conducts heat well. So what that does is it spreads the heat throughout the container first, which then agitates the water from 5 sides. Does that make sense to you guys? Like this is why you boil the pot. Did you guys know that smaller pots boil quicker? Because the molecular excitation, they're bouncing at a higher frequency. Thank you for understanding thermodynamics. Javery, my background is nuclear reactors, so that's why a lot of my financial calculus is actually engineering calculus, and it's just like I I call it bastard calculus, but yeah, because it's like some of it doesn't make sense. There's different versions of calculus, so you have to, yeah, I'm definitely heterodox, let's put it that way. But does that make sense? So literally, if we're trying to boil a pot, we're going to excite the water in the pot from multiple directions. Does that make sense? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so I'm a former Navy nuke, if you know what that is, Javery. I have no college degree. Yeah, I didn't go to college, or I didn't finish college at least. But yeah, I'm a former Navy nuke, and that might explain, that might illuminate some things now for you about me. Anyways, yeah, okay, does that make sense? This is the same stochastic process, whether we're talking about finance or economics or literally meteorology or marketing. We're talking about like we're going to agitate the water from multiple directions. Does that make sense? Because the more surfaces of this pot that we can add heat to, the more exponential bounces, the more combo shots. Do you guys understand combo shot? Like on a pool table? We're trying to create combo shots. So I'm going to physically go and put PYRESWAP stickers around Austin. Then I'm going to take pictures of where I put these PYRESWAP stickers. Then I'm going to have them tweeted on Twitter. Does that make sense? So literally, it's not just the fact that we have these stickers around Austin, ideally around the tech campuses, but also the fact that we can now show to people on Twitter that we have now 50 pieces of content that we can just tweet out because we can show 50 different stickers getting stickered. Does that make sense? Yeah, Winner, if you didn't hear the part about being ex-Navy, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to, yeah, the swear jar will be filled rapidly. Let's put it that way. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Good start of the week, okay? Great. All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming to the PYRESWAP show. As always, it's been a pleasure. And I think that you guys can always DM me if you have a concern. I'm not numb to what you feel. I'm not blind to what you see. I'm not deaf to what you hear. Yeah, like I understand how things look. I prioritize things in a way that involves orchestration and organization as the thing that has to happen first. This sometimes makes things implemented slower than with other people. But again, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together. It's not just about getting me to run around like a chicken doing 75 things. It's about me learning how to organize the amazing people around me into making something truly beautiful and historic and life-changing. Thank you so much. See you guys tomorrow.